this. Okay, good. So we've been going over the Buddha Dharma, the way to enlightenment, and we were on book 2, and at the end of chapter 2. Is it chapter 2 or chapter 1? Chapter 2, yeah, end of chapter 2. And the Buddha is now back at the Jeta Grove Monastery, and there's a section that says Buddha's instructions in the rear garden. And this is actually a very interesting section because he starts talking about karma. Okay, you've all heard of karma. Incidentally, just going off tangent here, I don't know if many of you are golf fans, but this past weekend, they had the PGA, Professional Golf Association Championship in the States, the Open, I guess, and US Open. And the winner was a Spanish golfer by the name of Jon Rahm. Now, the reason why I mention his name is that 2 weeks ago, he was in another tournament and he was leading on the last day by 6 strokes. So a clear-cut winner. But he found out that on the last day that he tested positive for COVID-19. So immediately he had to withdraw from that tournament. So, you know, when you think about it, the prize purse for these tournaments are like $1.5 million, $2 million, right? So he lost 1.5 or $2 million, assuming, of course, that he would have won that tournament. Well, with last day having a 6-stroke lead, it's pretty given in the golf world that he would have. Well, the odds were great in his favor. So he had to withdraw from that tournament, and he didn't win. But this weekend, this past weekend, he won. And after he won, they interviewed him, and the first thing he said is, "I believe in karma." Okay. And that his actions, he believed that something good was going to come about because of his previous performance, etc. So karma is now used quite irregularly in the general populace. Although it is, a Buddhist term, as you can see, the winner of a PGA golf tournament saying, "I believe in karma," right? So this talk at the Jeta Grove Monastery, and the Buddha talks about the fact that, all our actions start with the mind, he says, and that guarding the mind is like a well-laid roof of a castle. And just as the roof protects the ridge poles, rafters, and walls below, so the mind prevents desires from rotting the body, mouth, and mind, right? And it is true, a well-laid roof is very important for the foundation of the building. And we know that at our temple because we just had our roof redone, and it feels so nice to be in the temple. Our roof was getting quite old, and so we were getting leaks into the hondo before, and Bud Sakamoto would have to climb on the roof, and he would be putting in these metal sheets under the cedar shingles. And that was how we were patching it up until we just got it re-roofed, and it feels so nice to have the new roof. But this idea of the mind being the one that protects. So in the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha talks about karma as being action. Okay, karma is action with volition behind it. So it's not just a random action. There's actually some volition or some thought behind that action. Okay, so that's why when, let's say there's an accident that happens and somebody gets injured because of the accident, then if it's truly an accident, the outcome is not as, how can I say, it's not as fraught as if somebody had malintent and hurt somebody else, right? So that thought or that intention is very important in our actions. So, and that intention begins with the mind, right? And from that mind, then you get your actions of your body and your speech. Okay? So without that intention, the body and the speech will not manifest it, or it will not manifest itself. However, when there is that thought, it does manifest itself somehow in our body and in our speech. Okay, so let's say if you're thinking negatively about somebody, and you might not say anything negative to them, but your actions might show that negativity, right? You might give somebody, well, the old proverbial phrase is giving somebody the cold shoulder, right? That's an action. It's not verbal. You're giving somebody, you're turning away from somebody, right? I've actually heard, and this is a reflection of the Stistan Temple, is that many years ago, there were people that came into the temple and they did feel that they received a cold shoulder from them. And our Fujinkai ladies, not that they were giving cold shoulder or anything, but when it came time for bazaars, making the sushi rolls, right? They were very critical of others who were trying to help making sushi roll because they didn't know how to do it properly, right? And so that comes with the thought, and then the thought is followed by the speech and our actions, right? But this whole idea of the mind, this passage about the well-laid roof, this is reiterated much later. It comes out in this book. It's in the Dhammapada, which is, remember where it was. It's much later on in the, let's see, let me just quickly find the, yeah, it's in book 6 is where it comes out. So much later on in the chronology of the Buddha. But the Dhammapada, and I sent out just before the lecture, I sent out the material for this evening. Actually, maybe I'll bring it up on the screens for those who may not have had time to look at it. Just give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to pull up that the reference material, and I'll share it with you so you can all see it as well. Okay. Sorry, it's taking me a little longer, the computer. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay. So this idea of the mind comes up in the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a collection of phrases or verses 423 in all. And it's generally considered sort of the moral virtues in Buddhism. So I'm talking about morality and or ethical thoughts, if you will. The Dhamma means discipline or virtuous living, and Pada means path. Therefore, Dhammapada means path of virtuous living. Okay, and this Dhammapada begins. They're called the twin verses, and they're called twin verses because they're paired. So 1 and 2 go together. So, for instance, number 1, it says, everything is led by the mind. The mind is the leader. Everything is made up of the mind. If one speaks or acts with an evil mind, suffering follows them, like the wheel that follows the foot of the ox that draws it. And then in response to that, the second one says, everything is led by the mind. The mind is the leader. Everything is made up of the mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows them like the shadow that never leaves them, right? So how your mind leads you in how you behave. So if you have an evil mind, suffering will be created. If you have a pure mind, happiness will follow, right? The third one, he abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The hatred in one who harbors such thoughts is never pacified. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The mind of one who has no such thoughts is always at peace. Now, this is a very difficult thing, you know. We as human beings, I know myself, I will feel at the slightest thing, I might feel like, oh, they forgot me, or they, you know, I was not included, right? And you might harbor such thoughts. And that sort of festers in you, right? But if you can control the mind so that you realize those thoughts are all within yourself, then you can have peace, right? Indeed, hatred is never pacified by hatred. It is pacified by the absence of hatred. This is the law of antiguity. Okay? You may have heard a version of this that says hatred is not overcome by hatred. Hatred is overcome by love. But I think actually this version of it, I like better actually. Hatred is never pacified by hatred. It is pacified by the absence of hatred, right? You don't have to love your enemy, but you don't have to hate them as well, right? And this is a law. This is the law from antiquity, so it's an ancient law, right? The unwise do not know that they too will come to an end. One who realizes this has their struggles brought to an end. Okay? So the unwise think that they will go on forever, whereas those who realize that everything is temporary will have their struggles. It will ease their struggles. One who thinks that their body is without defilement, who does not control their senses, who does not know moderation in food, who is indolent, and who does not exert effort will be overcome by demons, like a weak tree down by the wind. Okay? So this one here in particular, my ears burn when I hear who does not know moderation in food. I think sometimes I overeat. I must admit I'm guilty of that. But also the fact that you are participating in the session or all these sessions that we've been doing, that's your effort, actually. So without that, it's very easy for us to be lax and do as we want. And they'll be overcome by demons like a weak tree down by the wind. So basically what this weak tree is referring to is a weak tree is generally that has very shallow roots, right? So by exerting effort, by controlling your mind, you will have much deeper roots, so you won't be swayed by your wants, the defilements or the demons. One who thinks that their body is full of defilements, who restrains their senses, who knows moderation in food, who has faith, and who exerts effort will never be overcome by demons. They will be like a mountain of rock that is never moved by the wind. So again, the stronger your foundation is, the better the base is. In fact, the incense burner we have in our hondo, that all alludes to this idea of foundation. So I've given this to talk to the Dharma school children and to a lot of people, but our incense burner here has 3 legs in an equilateral triangle. And that equilateral triangle is a very strong geometric shape. Bridges are based on triangles, actually. But this foundation, having a strong foundation, and those 3 we call the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And having that deep-rooted base helps you to overcome the many changes that occur in life. And that's what the incense burner is symbolizing. Okay, and so in Japanese too, there's a phrase, they say hara ga suwaru. Okay, hara ga suwaru literally means your stomach is well seated. Okay, you've got a lower base of your lower base of gravity, right? So the lower your gravity center of gravity is, the less likely you're going to topple over, right? And so having this balance is very important, and we become like a rock that is never moved by the wind. One who is defiled and is without self-control is not worthy of wearing a yellow robe. So again, here, the wearing a yellow robe is a reference to becoming a mendicant or a monk. Okay, so one who is full of defilement, who does not control themselves, is not worthy of becoming a monk. Okay. One who discarded all defilements, is well disciplined, and has self-control, is indeed worthy of wearing a yellow robe. So those who have self-control can become a monk. One who thinks of the unreal as the real and the real as the unreal will never reach the real, but will merely hold on to wrong views. It's a little convoluted, but if you don't know the truth from the truth, you'll always fall short, basically. And I've given, again, Dharma talks to the children, and the famous one from the Jataka tale is of the monkeys who are scrounging for food in the evening because it's so hot during the daytime. They sleep during the daytime, and in the evening they go out foraging for their food. And as they're foraging, they come across this well. And the smallest monkey of the troop looks down at the well, and to her surprise, she sees the moon at the bottom of the well. So she starts panicking, and she says, we have to do something. So all the other monkeys gather, and the largest monkey figures out, okay, I've got an idea. So he climbs into the well, holds on to the edge of the well, climbs in, and tries to reach down to grab the moon. But his arms aren't long enough. So he then asks the next monkey to climb down, hold on to him as he climbs down, and hang on to his tail and try to reach the moon. And of course, it's still not long enough. So pretty soon you get a chain of monkeys. You know that toy, the barrel of monkeys, that right, where you had all the monkeys hooked up? They look like that, the chain of monkeys down this well. And finally, the littlest monkey, the smallest monkey, is the last one to go in. And she's able to reach what she thinks is the moon, but all it is water, and she keeps on trying to grab it. But by this time, the first monkey, his arms are all tired out, and he says, I can't hold on anymore, and he falls down to the bottom. And it said that the Buddha happens to walk by and hears the commotion at the bottom of the well, and he looks down and sees all these monkeys splattering about. So the Buddha then gets a vine and puts it down the well, and one by one the monkeys come up, and the Buddha asks them, well, what were you doing in the bottom of the well? And they said, well, we were trying to save the moon. Right? And so the Buddha gently smiles and points to the sky, and of course you see the moon in the sky. And of course, it's very easy for us to know that what the monkeys were seeing was the reflection of the moon, right, in the well. Right? But this is, in fact, like us, is that when we don't see real as real, or when we think of the unreal as real, and the real as the unreal, we never will find the truth. Okay, so by knowing what is true, what is real, and that's through the guidance of the teachings that we begin to see what is truly important in life. Okay? One who sees the true as the true and the false as the false will reach the true and dwell in right thought. Okay. So when we talk about right thought here, we're not talking about right versus wrong, but more perhaps an enlightened thought. Okay, you're able to see things as they are, the reality of things. So it's not that the monkeys were wrong in what they're seeing, but they're not seeing the whole picture, right? They didn't realize that it's a reflection. But the right thought is to realize, no, this is just a mere reflection of the true moon. Right? And in fact, even seeing the moon, there are other examples that say even seeing the moon is not by the power of the moon, but in fact the power of the sun, right? What we're seeing is the sunlight hitting off the moon and coming down to us. So without the sun, we wouldn't be able to see the moon. Even though it's at nighttime, it's actually the working of the sun that is allowing us to see the moon. So seeing the truth for what it really is. So then the next two, and this is where that Dharma talk at the Jeta Grove comes back again. It says here, as rain leaks into a poorly thatched house, greed enters into an undisciplined mind, right? As rain does not leak into a well-thatched house, greed does not penetrate into a disciplined mind. So, many people or many Buddhists will tell you that, the first step to changing the world is to change the self, right? So without us realizing what is true and what is real, there's no hope for us to change the world. So if each of us have that discipline, then as a natural outcome of that, the world will change itself. So it's not like we try to change the world, but it's in our own actions, we begin to slowly affect what happens around us. The evildoer grieves both in this world and the hereafter. Seeing their own evil deeds, they grieve. The one who has accumulated merits rejoices both in this world and in the hereafter. Seeing the purity of their actions, they rejoice. Suffering here and suffering in the hereafter, in both worlds does the evildoer suffer, thinking, I have done evil. They suffer all the more in the evil realms. Being happy both in this world and in the next, the one who has accumulated merits is happy, thinking, I have done good deeds. They rejoice all the more in the good realms. So this again is talking about, remember we talked about the 6 realms of samsara, but there's the 3 better realms and then there's the 3 under realms. And so if you're doing, basically it's a very simple moral story that, if you're doing bad things will happen. So don't do bad, basically. Try to be good, right? So it's a very simple message, try to be good. Why not? If you're going to regret doing the evil acts. We have all done this, right? I know I regret some acts afterwards. I shouldn't have had that, or I shouldn't have done that. But we all do it, right? So if you can not do it to begin with, you don't have to worry about having those thoughts. Okay? Though he may commit to memory large portions of the teachings, if they neglect to practice the teachings, they are like a cowherd who keeps tabs on the cows belonging to another. They are not worthy of being a mendicant. Okay? Though they may commit only a small portion of the teaching to memory, if they should practice in accordance with the Dharma, detach themselves from greed, anger, and ignorance, attain wisdom and emancipation, and be unattached to this world and the next, they are worthy of being a mendicant. So it's not how much knowledge you have that's important, right? It's how you're able to apply that, what you have in your daily life. What's the what? Talk the talk and walk the walk. We don't just be a good speaker, but actually live by what you preach, I guess, right? So this is again in the Dhammapada, and there are many more. But this was the first section called the twin verses, and I introduced it because of this reiteration of this thatched house, right? And again, it gives us all the ideas of, again, here, it is talking about how the mind is the most important thing. So it's very similar to what the Buddha taught at the Jeta Grove. It's the mind is the leader, right? With our intentions, this is how things happen, Okay. So then he continues on, and he gives two reasons why the Dharma is superior, and going back to the Jeta Grove Monastery. And the Buddha says, the first reason is that if you commit something, commit an evil act, what the Buddha does is, first of all, it makes you see that you have committed such an act, or you have to see it for yourself. And then once you've understood that, you have to abhor the action and detach oneself from it. And here, there's a very famous story, and it's in Book 5, Chapter 3.3. If you want to, when you get the time, you could look at that. And I have mentioned this story before, and it's the story of Angulimala. And Angulimala, who's also known, his other name is, his other name was, where was that? Oh, Ahimsaka. Ahimsaka. Okay, it was his. So there was a fellow by the name of Ahimsaka, and he was actually a very large fellow, well built, right? Very handsome as well. But Ahimsaka had a master or a teacher who was a Brahmin. And this Brahmin was a very well-known Brahmin, well-known teacher. And Ahimsaka was very devoted to him and followed the teachings. And he was a very good and kind individual. But this Brahmin, he had a wife, and the wife seduces Ahimsaka. Okay? But Ahimsaka realizes, of course, that there's no way he would do anything to go against his teacher. So he denies, or he refutes the wife's her her guiles, if you will. And to this, she becomes very upset that she's turned down. So she rips her clothes and it tells her husband that she was attacked by Ahimsaka. So instead of punishing him, his master, the Brahmin teacher, tells Ahimsaka that, you know, you've become a very good student, but there's one more thing you have to do to complete your studies, or your studies to become to have full consciousness, full awareness. And what he tells Ahimsaka is, you have to make a sacrifice of 100 people. You have to go and kill them. It gives him a sword. And he says, you have to go to this very busy crossroad and go and kill. And take a finger from each one of the people you kill and make a necklace. And this throws Ahimsaka into great confusion, because up until then, he's been taught things like compassion, helping others. These are all, you know, doing things for the betterment of society and all things that were good. And then suddenly his master is saying, you know, as a final test, you have to do this. And he basically, he sort of goes crazy. And suddenly, out of this crazed mental state, this great anger starts welling up in him, and he starts ruthlessly killing one after another. And he's given the name Angula Mala, which means the finger necklace or something like that. And he's becomes very known throughout, infamous for his deeds. And he gets to 99 people, but by the 99th person, everybody knows of this terrible bandit. So everybody stays clear of where he's at. And except his mother actually makes him some meal and takes it to him, thinking that she wants to help her son. And in his rage, he goes to attack his mother. But it so happens the Buddha intervenes. And the Buddha shows him the errors in his way. And Angulimala realizes what he has done, and he becomes a devout follower of the Buddha. And at first, the Buddha just lets him become a follower, and he doesn't punish him per se for what he had done. But Angulimala goes out to receive alms, and of course, people still dread this individual who may have now become a monk, but they all remember what he had done. And in fact, he ends up getting stoned by the people, and yet he remains calm and realizes that his previous actions are creating the present situation. But he overcomes that, and he becomes actually one of the very close disciples of the Buddha. So again, in the talk in the Jeta Grove, it's once you recognize the evils that you've done, to abhor that act and to detach yourself from it is very important. And so this Angulimala, the story of Angulimala, is a very good example of that. And then he ends up at the end of this, at the Jeta Grove, he talks about the one who falls, the evil person who ends up falling into the realm of hell. And there, the person is confronted by Mara, who asks him, well, didn't you see the three messengers of old man, sick person, and a dead body? These are all messengers to help us wake up to see reality. but this person who has fallen into this situation said that in each situation, he didn't really think much of it. So again, here in this teaching, they're telling us that we have to be aware of what's happening to us, or we should take these as messages or lessons of our impermanence. And so when we understand that, then live each moment with compassion and live each moment with kindness is very important for us. So that ends chapter 2, and then we go into chapter 3. And again, following that principle of the mind being very important, the Buddha actually delves into this further. It begins with a short passage on this Queen Kema. I'm not really going to go into it because I didn't find it that interesting particularly. But the one other thing I should say is that Queen Kema is the wife of King Bimbisara. And we often associate this King Bimbisara with Queen Vaidehi, who is, there's a whole, the tragedy of Rajagriha is called. And that's part of our Pure Land lineage. But that we'll get into again later. So King Bimbisara, like all other kings, had many wives, and Queen Kema was one of his wives. Okay. But following that, then this chapter talks about the realm of enlightenment, it's titled. And it starts off by saying that the Buddha made a trip to Sri Lanka. Well, they just call it Lanka, but it's gone to the southern country or southern kingdom by boat. So that's, 1 + 1 = 2. So that's Sri Lanka, what we call Sri Lanka today, right? And there he's invited by the king, King Ravana, and he talks to the king about there's a bodhisattva, Mahamati, who joins that audience, and on behalf of the king, Mahamati asks the Buddha to share what he experienced when he attained enlightenment. And so it's then that the Buddha talks about how everything is like a phantom. All our existence is like a phantom. And as he says that, suddenly he and the castle and everything disappears, and the king is alone by himself. And through this, the king realizes that what the Buddha is trying to teach him is that everything is really like a dream. And when he comes to this realization, the Buddha reappears, and he teaches the king about not being attached to neither what they call dharmas, which are things, nor adharmas, non-existent things. Okay? So don't go to either extreme. Don't say this is right or this is wrong, but to recognize things as they are. And he gives the example of the ceramic pitcher. We know that it exists, and yet we also know that a ceramic pitcher will inevitably, at some time, it will break. But in our discriminative mind, we look at it and we automatically assume that this is going to last forever. And this is what we do with everything, is that we say it's either here or it's not. But we don't see it as just a phenomenal event, right? Sort of like the waves on the water. We can see it, and we know it in one sense, we think it's there, but they're just phenomenal events that are occurring at that instant, right? And so the Buddha talks about the fact that the Dharma goes beyond human discrimination, because when one discriminates and becomes attached to even ideas such as the Dharma or Adharma. And this is actually the beginning of the whole premise of, or the teaching of what we call sunyata. Okay, sunyata, which is one of the most important teachings in the Mahayana Buddhism. And sunyata is sometimes translated as emptiness, but it doesn't really mean nothingness. On the contrary, it means non-attachment to the discriminatory mind. Okay, so sunyata, when we think about it, it's not a void, but it means not being attached to this discriminatory mind. It is a mind that has freed itself from delusion. And this is also known as Tathagata Garbha, or womb of the Buddhas, or Buddha nature. So you've probably heard the word Buddha nature before, right? Buddha nature. And normally when we explain Buddha nature, we say that all beings have the capacity to attain Buddhahood, enlightenment. Okay, so all of us have what we call this Buddha nature, the capacity or the ability to attain enlightenment. But when we talk about that, there has to be an awakening that's associated with it. On one hand, from the Buddha's perspective, from the Dharma's perspective, everything has that capacity to attain enlightenment. But it's only through awakening, it's only through freeing ourselves from the world of delusion that we are able to attain enlightenment, if you will. So it becomes a little bit more like psychology, and it gets a little bit, I see a lot of people closing their eyes and looking down or contemplating downwards when I'm talking about this, because it is a little bit more of a difficult subject, I think, for people to grasp about the mind. And then, the Buddha then starts talking about what we call the eight consciousness. And what I've included here is actually from our winter session, from the book from Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh talked about the eight consciousness in his section of right mindfulness. And so I sort of put the two together here. And in the Mahayana teachings, we talk about the 8 stages of consciousness. So in Japanese, we call this arayashiki, or alaya vinaya in Sanskrit. And first of all, in this whole idea of mindfulness, there are different ways of being mindful or seeing things. And first of all is recognition, and recognition of our different body parts, our elements that we are made up of. And when we practice this, we are mindful of our various organs that we have, okay? On Thursday nights, we actually do the Seiza meditation. Right now, as part of that, we do a session of mindfulness in which we try to contemplate on various parts of the body. And of those, the ears, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and touch are very important. And along with the sensory organs, there are perceptions that happen: sight or vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And those are so the 5 sensory perceptions. And then to that also is included the mind, and the perception is consciousness that goes along with that. And then with every experience that we have, it's said in mindfulness that you can either perceive things as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. You might not think either. Okay. And so with the formation of the mind, or idea of the mind, then we get into deeper mind. So there's what we call the subconscious. And then even deeper than that, it's called the storehouse mind. or Araya Vinaya. So the consciousness, the eight consciousness, right? So there are the sensory consciousness. So with the eyes we see, and when we see something, we are conscious of it. So if I hold this up, you can see and you say, oh, he's holding up his nenju, right? And that's because of what's happening through your eyes. Hearing, similarly, smelling. There's all these consciousnesses that are associated with it. Smelling is actually, smelling and tasting are actually two of the more stronger consciousness, right? You can smell something and it'll bring you back to when you were a 5-year-old, right? If you smell some food that you haven't had for many years and you could smell it, and all of a sudden you're brought back into a different consciousness. Or taste, right? Your mom's home cooking, right? It can bring you back to a completely different consciousness. Tactile, touching, right? And mental, thinking, right? Mental consciousness. So added to these 6 consciousness is the subconscious, right? Or the manas consciousness. The manas consciousness is where it's said in Buddhism that we begin to attach ourselves to our ego. This is where this thing called I starts coming in. So from the manas consciousness, this attachment to the I, then we get all the other 6 sensory consciousness that above it. And then below that, though, is what they call the alaya vijnana consciousness, storehouse or seed consciousness. And this is a collective consciousness of life where every experience that happens goes into this storehouse. And this is also where all of our potential comes from this storehouse consciousness. Okay. So these are what we call the 8 consciousness in Buddhism. And this section was the Buddha talking, trying to teach those people in Sri Lanka about the fact that our minds are based on, first of all, the sensory consciousness and the manas consciousness. And these are all ego-driven. Yeah, they're all ego-driven, basically. But below that, he says there is this alaya consciousness, storehouse consciousness. And coming in touch with that deep mind is also very important, according to the teaching. We're trying to come in contact with that. Okay, I've talked quite a bit on some difficult subjects, perhaps. Bachan's house. What are you trying to say there, Jennifer?
I'm saying the smell.
The
smell of Bachan's house.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, see, Jennifer and I can share in our consciousness because when she says Bachan's house, I know exactly what smell she's talking about, right? So this is showing you how our sensory perceptions can create a different consciousness or take us into a different consciousness, right? It's not like Jennifer and I are smelling that consciousness at the moment, but we know exactly what that is. And all of you have that same experience on yourself or within yourself. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And if there are any questions or comments that you would like to make? Anybody?
So I kind of have a question. So the I is so important, right? Having an idea of me or I, you need that as a person and as an individual. But how does one balance that with, I guess, how does one temper that from becoming too big?
Yeah. So
and going into the realms that you were talking about where it becomes harmful to one's personality.
Yeah, so where it becomes harmful is it's like the pitcher, right? The ceramic pitcher. I is really the ceramic pitcher, right? And if we think that that ceramic pitcher is the absolute thing, we get into trouble. And so when we think I becomes the most important thing, that's when we get into trouble. But if we can see I as the ceramic pitcher, it has a function. We do need it to live in society. We need an identity, but that's all it is an identity. It's nothing more. It's you know, it's like the picture. You don't really the picture doesn't gloat and say, "Look at me, I'm this wonderful picture." It's just a picture. And similarly, if I could be understood in that way, basically, don't let your head get too big, right? And control, and that's where the controlling of the mind comes in through discipline, right? And that's why in the previous uh, talk I gave, I talked about how the Buddha said when a mendicant goes and receives alms from a household, that they have to be very humble, right? Don't receive it with a feeling that you're special or anything. And he talks about how Shariputra was very good at this, and that understand that we're interconnected, but don't place a self-importance, if you will, and try to be humble, basically, as much as we can, and that's a discipline as well. Anybody else want to chime in? Tanis, do you want to say anything? Share your thoughts? You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I'm on this phone, so it's all very weird to me because I can't really see anybody else or what's going on.
Oh,
too
really?
much.
Oh,
Yeah, all I can see is myself,
oh,
and then I can see you, but it's really hard to read everything because
okay.
I've never done this on the phone before. Yeah, so I don't really have much to say other than that.
Well, I'm glad you got on today.
Yeah.
I got your email yesterday.
Yeah, I know. So crazy. I thought today was Wednesday.
Tanis tried joining yesterday. Marilyn, you want to say anything? Share a question or anything?
I'm actually interested in that third level of consciousness, that sort of DNA level.
Yes.
And is that the level that people are trying to get to when they're meditating?
Oh, that's a good question. So depending on the school of Buddhism that you're talking about, the goals for meditation can be a little different too. Okay, so for instance, in Zen meditation, the goal is to attain satori, which is a state of awakening. It, it's So the deep consciousness, as I mentioned, that's also the consciousness, or getting to that area of what we call sunyata, or nothingness, or emptiness, or thusness. But again, that, as I mentioned, sunyata is not negating things, but it's detaching yourself from the discriminatory mind. So it's actually being able to see things as it is. So and this is where it gets really, really into headspace, like the whole idea of form is not form, and existence is also not existence. It's understanding that all these things happen simultaneously, right? So I think you have to, you're trying to expand your mind, but it's almost like blowing your mind up because it goes beyond, the moment you have a thought of something, they'll tell you, no, detach yourself from that thought. You're attaching to something, right? So it becomes very, very hard to understand or practice, and that's why uh, for those who follow that path, it really is a very difficult discipline. I mean, they're constantly working at controlling your mind, getting into the deeper state of mind. And for those who are able to do it, it is a tremendous accomplishment. But the Buddha also gives a path to those who may not be able to do that. And that's the Pure Land path. Okay? So unfortunately, we haven't gotten there because that comes out later in this book. And I've been going from front to back in this book. But the Pure Land path, and so basically the founder of the Pure Land path, Shinran Shoni, for himself, he tried as hard as, and he was, by all intents and purposes, a well acknowledged and accomplished monk. He had practiced for 20 years on Mount Hiei as a Tendai monk. And so, for him to come to a point where he felt, I'm still incapable of ridding myself of this ego or getting to this awakening. Well, maybe he had an awakening. He had the awakening that he can't have the awakening. And that's when he actually leaves the mountain to search up for a path that is liberating. And that was this Pure Land path, because it didn't make you, he realized his own limitations. And yet he was accepted even with those limitations. And that was very liberating for him. And it became, and it also became very popular in Japan. It became the most popular form of Buddhism because what it did was it allowed the average layperson to also learn the Dharma or come in contact with the Dharma. Whereas before, the layperson, in particular in Japan, the role of the layperson was to support the Sangha, and through that, they would receive merit. But it wasn't that they themselves would learn the Dharma, whereas what Shinran and his predecessors were teaching was that, no, this is actually, there is a path that is for everyone, that anyone can listen to and be accepted as we are, right? So yes, the consciousness or the practice of attaining that consciousness, there are schools of meditation that really try to do that, and again, for those who can do it, it is a tremendous accomplishment. So it's not belittling them or anything. It is truly, they're amazing individuals, but not, the majority of us are not that disciplined. So I don't know if I answered your question at all.
Yes, you did. It's just something else to think about.
Yeah. Okay. If does anybody else have anything they wanted to question or share or?
I was just gonna add that the Heart Sutra deals a lot with all that sunyata
Yes, very
forms,
much so.
emptiness is form.
Yeah. So yes, so that will come. It's reiterated again, very much emphasized in the Heart Sutra, right? But you can see the beginnings of that idea of sunyata here in this early stages in the Jeta Grove, right? Okay. Yes, Rose. You have to unmute yourself. You're still muted. You have to press the little microphone.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, get
Okay.
get out of there.
Okay.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is I've always been interested in quantum theory and
Uh-huh.
I've done a lot of reading over the years. Well, you will love this book. It's called Helgoland by Carlo Ravella, who's one of the leading quantum theorists. And he, after much looking at mechanics, et cetera, he then, and I did not know this was in this because it was just one more thing I wanted to read. And there was a 2nd century monk named Nagarjuna in Japan, and he talks about exactly what we're talking about now. And he takes a whole chapter and basically just saying that the thesis of his writing at the time, which translates as the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, that it's simply, this is what the theorist, the quantum theorist is saying, that nothing exists in itself independently from something else. And this idea of I, like who is the I? Well, that the fact that that the true essence of our being, the I is nothing other than the vast and interconnected set of phenomena that constitute it, each one dependent on something else.
Mhm.
And it goes on. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is marvelous that in second CE, we have the Buddhist teachings explaining quantum theory, which I just thought was amazing. So if you want to read, and it's so well written,
Don't show
I
it.
won't show it, no. It's so well written and easy to understand. Well, but it's just the most marvelous, marvelous book. And it's just recently been published. He is one of the top quantum theorists. And he looks
What's
at
the title again? Sorry.
Helgoland, Helgoland, which is a tiny island in the North Baltics. And he went there to try and find what we're talking about, what Marilyn is talking about. Well, how do we meditate on this? What do I do to get this theory? That's way back, I think around just before the First World War. And it's a Danish island. And it's wonderful. So in addition to everything else we're reading, if you could even, just look at, he's written so many things, but from a real Buddhist perspective, he is of Italian descent, but he now lives in Canada. So we can take him as our
could-
own.
Email that
I could,
to Reverend.
yeah, if you're interested, but it's just, isn't that wonderful that
Well-
there we are?
Just to let you know, I did give a lecture on Buddhism and quantum.
I should have been there. I love that stuff.
Maybe what I will do, if it's okay with everybody, next week, I will rehash the lecture I gave on quantum physics and Buddhism. Because as you mentioned, there are elements in Buddhism that I believe truly is encapsulated in quantum physics. And so if you're interested, I can reintroduce that talk. It really is fascinating. Yeah, and basically with quantum physics, quantum mechanics, they talk about the behavior of light.
Yeah.
And how light has tendency to act differently. And one of the things that the scientists found was light actually changes when there is somebody observing it,
Yeah.
right? So the fact that there is, it's that old Zen koan. Does a tree that falls in an empty forest, does it make a sound, right? So the similar light the behavior of light actually changes if there's an observer, which is kind of mind-boggling. But if you're interested, I can bring up those papers and I can.
Sorry, everyone, if that's not your cup of tea, but it's so fascinating. You know,
Uh,
nothing new
it-
under
it's
the sun.
interesting. It's very interesting.
It is so.
So I'm actually surprised that there was. I've had discussions with some other quantum physicists, and they weren't too happy because they think, oh, everybody's comparing quantum physics to something else nowadays, and so he was he couldn't he didn't agree with me, but if you're interested, I can do that next week. Then I'll send you also the papers that I produced for that.
Oh, that would be lovely. Would be really great. He's written another book called Reality is Not What It Seems. I love the title. Oh, anyway.
Okay, so thank you everyone, and yeah, so we'll close tonight's session with the Nimbutsu. So please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. It's funny because I actually gave the talk about 10 years ago in Vancouver, and it was videotaped. And then just a little while ago, earlier this year, I attended, so the Jodo Shinshu correspondence course, we started a book club. And I attended the first session of this book club. And there was a fellow in London, England, and I don't, how do I say this? Well, when we got onto the book club, basically, the first thing he said was, Ikuta Sensei, I'm a fan of yours. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't know this person from England.
A groupie.
And he had actually seen that lecture, and he actually posted, he has I can't remember his website. I'll look it up. But he's got a posting of all these different interesting Dharma talks, or what he selected as interesting Dharma sessions. And he actually had my
Isn't that
from 10 years ago. So, so I mean, if you thought it was interesting, I guess it could be interesting. So I'll give you that talk next week then. So don't Google it, or you'll spoil the lecture next week. Or you can, I don't care. Okay. Anyways, thank you, everyone.